This is so great. Brian Stelter, CNN's talking head, gets utterly and entirely remorselessly deconstructed by a teenager. And as I'm listening to this, this is speaking to my heart today, only because I just did a video where I was kind of pointing out this article right here, how they frame literal lying, voluminous amounts of lying to the American public as being this tool to combat information warfare. They are, I guess my point is this. They uncritically carried one lie after the next, after the next, after the next. And in that particular article, they own up to the fact that they were carrying those lies, basically almost triumphantly celebrating how monstrously wrong they got it over the course of these last several months, and was doing so basically carrying water for the Biden administration, not reality, something else, and justifying it basically by, we're going to screw with Putin's head, as if the lying that you're doing to your public is somehow affecting what Putin does militarily on the ground in order to secure the regions to which he is trying to secure. It is lunacy. But this is what U.S. media has become. And that it was that way before this conflict. We're just getting it in this kind of large hyperbolic volumes. I mean, think back for the moment of all the stories that they basically carried that were utterly wrong, especially during the Trump era. And again, during that period of time, they would justify getting it wrong because they were fighting for America by going against Donald Trump. Their national responsibility to be against Trump and hold back the night trumped, no pun intended, their philosophical and ethical responsibility to just tell the truth. Your job wasn't to be a bulwark against Trump. Doing your job in and of itself actually might have did a better job than the way that you were doing it and the way that you were losing credibility with people who you were actually trying to reach and influence. I guess my point is this. This flagrant lying over the last several months that they're basically trying to justify is one thing. But this weird arrangement that we've ended up in, where media's responsibility is no longer to get the scoop, to get the story. It's become this weird, lazy, okay, I have a relationship with this particular general or that particular person or this particular person that's in the political arena, and then they're giving information because they want to use that information to do something operational in the larger world on a domestic or international front. And that's the way I would do it. I would be a propagandist for whoever, whether it's true or not, irrelevant. I get the story, I get the headline, whether it was true, who cares? But this notion where rumor and innuendo get replaced for an actual story. And I have no idea how we've gotten to this point, but this seems to be the point that we're in. And when the kid is confronting Brian Stelter, the kid is making that point. He's doing a rundown, story after story after story after story, that they got monstrously wrong. Stelter's response to this is to basically lie, to try to basically dodge the matrix everything that the kid just said, despite the fact that everything the kid said was correct. It was right. This kid trends more to the right. I don't care in this moment. At the end of the day, what the kid basically brought up and said, hey, you guys ran this story, this story, this story, this story, this story. All of those stories were incorrect. Welcome, it's gratifying, to the soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, like, share, subscribe. You can always support this content through PayPal, Patreon, or in this case, Super Chats. This video is gratifying, especially after reading that infuriating article that is basically justifying lying to the American public and framing it in such a way as if this is some kind of great information warfare tool. And even in the way they start the article talking about with a departure from the past. Because, again, this is the United States. And they can't say they use propaganda in the past also. So it's almost like they're trying to say, hey, this is something different. them lying flagrantly to the American public like that, and us just carrying it is something new, is something different. We didn't used to be this horrendous at our jobs. I suppose that's debatable. Anyway, here's Brian Stelter getting entirely and completely remorselessly deconstructed by a child at an event that is ironically named Disinformation and the Erosion of Democracy. And by the way, this idea of the Washington Post, democracy dies in the darkness. How pretentious. And I'm saying that as somebody who has a byline of precipitously perched, I am making the point that it is pretentious as shit to say democracy dies in the darkness, and yet have an article where you guys admittedly carried propaganda, carried outright and utter lies from the Biden administration uncritically, as if it was something that was actual news and a story. That article just outed all of that nonsense that you guys have been carrying for the last several months as being fictitious at best. Democracy is not dying in darkness. It's dying on the pages of the Washington Post, the New York Times, and all of these other articles that are not doing their jobs and asking these kind of larger questions about, does this even make sense? Does the Biden administration have an incentive to lie in this particular moment, to try to tie China to these other events, whether or not China has something to do with it or not? Again, one of the other lies that they basically own up to in that article. It's amazing that they own up to that at all. But again, I'm making the point of that's why this is so gratifying to see this being put to newsman, talking head, Brian Stelter.
Hi, thank you for coming. My name is Christopher Phillips. I'm a first year at the college. My question is for Mr. Stelter. You've all spoken extensively about Fox News being a purveyor of disinformation, but CNN is right up there with them. They pushed the Russian collusion hoax. They pushed the Jussie Smollett hoax. They smeared Justice Kavanaugh as a rapist, and they also smeared Nick Sandmann as a white supremacist. And yes, they dismissed the Hunter Biden laptop affair as pure Russian disinformation. With mainstream corporate journalists becoming little more than apologists and cheerleaders for the regime, is it time to finally declare that the canon of journalistic ethics is dead or no longer operative? All the mistakes of the mainstream media, and CNN in particular, seem to magically all go in one direction. Are we expected to believe that this is all just some sort of random coincidence, or is there something else behind it?
Great question. Great question. I want to buy that kid a beer or tequila or something. I don't know how old he is. I think he's a teenager. But all things being equal, great question. Here is a list of your failures over the course of several years. Here they are. Laid out. All for you. This is all for you. Is corporate media the death of basically real news and media? What do you think, Brian Stelter? You're on corporate media. You're one of these people that was carrying all of these stories and everything else. What is Brian Stelter going to say? This kid just gave him real information. This feels like the Tulsi Gabbard stuff, right? Hitting Kamala Harris. Here's your failures. All at once. Deal with it. Or better yet, Star Trek. Q with Picard, where Q is saying, here are all of humanity's failings. All of them. Own it. And Picard record. Oh, no, I'm not going to own that. This is Brian Stelter. Here are your sins, sir. What do you have to say for it? Now, what is Brian Stelter going to do? Is he going to own it and say, look, dude, you're absolutely right. We are horrible at our jobs, and we have been getting it monstrously wrong for years now. But we thought when we were during Trump, we needed to defend democracy. And now we can't necessarily get back to any level of real news and information, and so this is just what we got. Or is he just going to say, there is no spoon? There is no spoon at all. No spoon. What say you, Stelter?
It's too bad. It's time for lunch.
You have 30 seconds.
No, I mean, there's a clock that says 30 seconds. But I think my honest answer to you, and I'll come over and talk in more detail after this, is that I think you're describing a different channel than the one that I watch. But I understand that is.
I think you're describing a different channel than the one that you watch? Dude, we're talking about the one that you are on. And from the standpoint of like, I'll come over and talk to you. Like, I don't need to talk to you, bro. I don't need to talk to you, man. I gave you my question. I just want you to answer. I don't need you to come over here with, I'll talk to you later. I don't need that. Don't need that. Don't need that. I'm leaving immediately after I get your answer to this question you're basically dodging by saying there is no spoon. But let him finish. I don't want to stop him from making this point.
Is a popular right-wing narrative about CNN. I think it's important when we talk about shared reality and
A popular right-wing narrative about CNN? What are you talking about? Yes, I understand his framing of this is from the standpoint of the right. What does that matter if what he's saying is true? Which it is. I hope you get my point. Meaning, if I bring up stories that are important to me as a lefty that I think CNN got wrong, or whether he brings up stories from the standpoint of a right-winger that he believes CNN got wrong, if it's just kind of flat fact, yes or no, a binary choice, and you keep ticking yes from the standpoint of yes, they got that wrong, yes, they got that one wrong, yes, they got that one wrong. Meaning, if the things that you're naming are true, the framing is less relevant, at the very least in this very specific question or argument that the guy is basically making, or the point that he's making to Stelter. Stelter's like, yeah, I don't know the channel that you guys are talking about. Okay. There's no spoon. There's no spoon. Despite the fact that all of those stories were true. Meaning, what that kid just said there. CNN carried those stories. But fair enough, there's no spoon. And then immediately, that's a right-wing talking point. Again, just because it's framed from the right doesn't necessarily mean that it's wrong. And in this very specific case, the kid is completely right. Zero pun intended.
democracy. All these networks, all these news outlets have to defend democracy. And when they screw up, admit it. But when Benjamin Hall, the Fox correspondent, was wounded...
Dude, you just... when they screw up, they gotta admit it. As I say, there is no spoon. Despite the fact that all of the stories that the kid brought up were stories that you guys carried. That's astonishing. That's astonishing. I don't know what network you're talking about, dude. However, we definitely got to take responsibility when we get it wrong. Okay. Fair enough. He's a person, right? Is what it is.
In Ukraine. The news crews at CNN and the New York Times stopped what they were doing, and they tried to help. They tried to help him get out of the country. They tried to find the dead crew members. That's what news outlets do. That's how they actually do work together, to your question about sharing those kinds of connections and trust. We don't talk about it enough, though. We don't share that reality about how that happens. And with regards to the regime, I think you mean the President Biden. The last time I spoke with a Biden aide, we yelled at each other. So that's the reality of the news business that people don't see, that people don't hear. They imagine that it's a situation that it simply is not. But I think your question, it speaks to the failure of journalism to show our work and show the reality of how our profession operates. We have a lot of work to do, I think.
Are you insane? Are you insane? What kind of answer is that? It's like, what the actual fuck? This kid comes to you with very specific, concrete, that, yeah, I need to try to articulate what's bugging me about this. This kid comes to you with very specific things. You got this wrong, this wrong, this wrong, this wrong, and this wrong. It's either true or false, right? It's a binary choice. Did you get those things wrong, or didn't you get those things wrong? You did get those things wrong. You guys were getting it wrong constantly, especially from the standpoint of Donald Trump, and it always went in one direction, which is kind of what the point that kid is trying to make. You guys consistently got it wrong in a very specific direction. Now, some people in trying to defend Stelter was like, well, Fox News is so... I don't give a shit what Fox News did. Fox News is a propaganda outlet. And does CNN gauge itself by the level of news from Fox News? If so, you should say that. You can't use that as a defense. I am not right or left in this stuff. I'm more so in line of, okay, well, what's more likely to be true and what's the contextual information of the world? I am making a point. You did get those things wrong. Your response to that kid is simultaneously, one, I have no idea what you're talking about. No idea what you're talking about. Two, when we get it wrong, we should take responsibility for when we get it wrong. Okay, fair enough. And then you take zero responsibility because you've already dodged any notion of accountability for getting it wrong, your network, and you say, look, the real problem here is not us getting all of those things wrong that you articulated, in addition to a lot of other things that come across basically as just cutting in a particular direction. It's not that. It's not that. You guys misunderstand us on that. What we got wrong is not showing you this connected tissue of journalists and how we are people and how we do our jobs. That's what we got wrong. The perception of events. That's what it is. We didn't fuck up constantly. That's not what it is. You just didn't see us do our jobs in the way that you needed to see us do our jobs to fulfill this self-aggrandizing image of ourselves for us to impart that to you. Are you insane? If you look at what the public's perception of Western media, it is abysmally low. Abysmally low. And your response to that is, no. There is no spoon. There's no spoon. You guys just have a misperception of us. We just misperceive. We're not misperceiving anything, Stelter. In fact of the matter is that kid is dead on right. Dead on right. That kid is doing God's work. And I'll talk to you later. I don't want to talk to you later. I asked you a very specific question, and your response to that question is to dodge, deny, and then somehow say we got to take accountability despite the fact that everything that he told you was correct. And your accountability was to basically say the problem is just misperception. Love it. Kid, God bless. God bless. Like I said, that kid is doing God's work. God's work. Like, share, and of course, subscribe. Thanks, everyone.